welcome to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights, and I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to see more content from me, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics. Please check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. Thank you. Also, if you're interested in tarot, I have started a tarot channel more recently, and I'm going to link that in the video description as well as in the pinned comment. So go ahead and check it out if you're interested in tarot. Maybe subscribe. I would be very appreciative. Okay. And today's topic is going to be about Elizabeth Taylor, like I have also mentioned in the community tab. For those of you who have seen that, this is a video that has been requested several times for over many months, I think. And I have decided to finally talk about her because she is a fascinating case study. I have also briefly talked about her in the Upapada Lagna video, so I will not go in depth about her Upapada Lagna situation anymore because I have tackled it in that video. So if you're interested in reading more or understanding her Upapada Lagna situation, I'm going to link that video in the description. You can go ahead and watch it. For those of you who don't know, the Upapada Lagna is basically like a chart within the natal chart that, according to Vedic astrology, gives a lot more insight into the kind of partner you're going to meet and, well, all kinds of things about the future spouse / long-term partner. But again, I won't get into that because I have made an in-depth video, so you can go ahead and watch that video. Okay, so this is about some of the main themes in Elizabeth Taylor's life. I'm not really going to start with like some kind of a biography on her because I do think she is a very famous personality, and I think she has been contemporary with pretty much everyone who will be watching this video. So I'm not going to be like talking about the story of her life. I'm just going to be looking at some of the key factors that play up in her chart, and I'm going to basically back up her chart with examples from her life as I go along, okay? So I'm gonna get straight into it. The first thing that I looked at, I was very curious because she was a child star. So I was very curious to see what her chart says about her parents. And again, I'm going to be linking all the related videos that I'm going to be mentioning. I'm going to link them in the description so you can go ahead and watch them if you're interested, because I'm going to reference another one now, which is the video that I made on bad childhoods. And in fact, not just the video that I made on bad childhoods, but now that I have looked at her chart, the first thing that stood out to me is the fact that she has moon in Vishaka Nakshatra. So it is so fitting that I'm going to talk about her just after I posted the video on the Jupiter-ruled nakshatras. And for those of you who have not watched that video, I also mentioned there that people who have placements in Vishaka, especially the moon or the sun, some to a lesser extent other placements, the ascendant and the rest of the planets, will have a bad relationship, tend to have a bad relationship with at least one of their parents. I mentioned there, and I didn't mention this in the bad childhoods video. I should have mentioned it. Okay, well, the first thing that stood out to me is the fact that Elizabeth Taylor had moon in Vishaka, which basically would already paint a slightly negative picture of her parents, or at least the relationship to one of her parents. And the second thing that stood out to me, equally important, is that her son situation is not that great. And as I have mentioned in that video about bad childhoods, the sun is the father archetype. And in her case, the sun is an enemy sign, and it's in Aquarius, and it is in the 4th house in her horoscope, which is by house position the worst placement for the sun to be in. Yeah, basically the least strength by house. which generally would paint a pretty difficult situation with the father. Usually when the son is not strongly represented, I would have thought maybe an absent father, a father who was neglectful. But on top of this, in her chart, if you look at her chart, you're going to see that Mars is also in the fourth house conjunct Mercury. On top of which, Mercury rules the 8th house. It also rules the 11th house, which is the house of gains, but then it also rules the 8th house. Now, also, I have mentioned this in several videos, that connections between the 8th house and the 4th house, I think also in the Bad Childhoods video, that this connection tends to show a painful early upbringing. And in her case, pretty much this was the case. And her father, as far as I have read, was basically physically abusive and jealous as well. So the jealousy theme actually goes hand in hand with her moon being in Vishaka. Again, like I mentioned in the Jupiter ruled Nakshatras video, Vishaka has this theme connected to jealousy towards, especially towards a child, because of the legend associated with it. Again, for more details, I do suggest you also watch that video, or at least the segment on Vishaka. And this is very fitting for her, because already there is a theme that basically her father was jealous, according to what I have read, although her declarations about her father seem to be almost making excuses for her. The truth was that she also admitted that he was basically jealous because she started working as a child actor from the age of 9 and was basically making a lot of money, more money than her father was making. Eventually, her parents did also get divorced. So her childhood was really not great. So we see that already with Sun being in the 4th house, but the last factor that I wanted to mention is that you also see Mars there. You see Mars, the ruler of the 1st house, because she has the 1st house, also the ascendant is Scorpio. And the ruler of the 6th house, which is the house of enemies. I have also mentioned this, okay, I'm not sure if I mentioned it in the Bad Childhoods video, but I definitely mentioned it in the foreign settlement video that I made a while ago, that when you see connections between the 8th house, the 6th house, and the 4th house, generally it shows that the person has not had a great childhood. On top of which, she also has Mars there, Mars in the 4th house. I definitely mentioned this as a bad placement in the Bad Childhoods video. Also mentioned that, what do you know, actually, now that I look at her chart, Will Smith also had Moon in Vishaka, has Moon in Vishaka, and Mars in the 4th house, and his father was abusive as well towards his mother. I'm not sure if he was abusive towards her, but there was violence in the family, according to some statements that he made. So yes, already I see this very clearly, sadly, from her chart. And on top of that, when I dug more into it, turned out that her mother was really not much better. I mean, her mother was not physically abusive, but she was very much, you know, I guess you would call her a stage mother who constantly pushed her from behind to be successful, often to really unhealthy lengths. I remember reading some article that her mother would make nasty comments about her from a young age, that saying that she was not particularly pretty, all kinds of things that were really kind of nasty. So really, all in all, the relationship with both her parents was not great. On top of which, when it comes to her mother, I can see that Saturn is aspecting the moon by 10th aspect. I also mentioned this as another aspect that shows basically a pretty cold mother figure, you know, an element of emotional detachment. Also in her case, really goes hand in hand with the kind of mother she had, who was pushing her professionally from a young age to succeed. Of course, you might say there was also a silver lining to this, because eventually she did become successful and managed to work as an actor from a young age. So this is something that I have seen with respect to her childhood right off the bat. which really goes hand in hand with her later experience as a woman, having had multiple husbands and different troubles in relationships, because, well, generally that's what happens from a psychological point of view as well. When a woman doesn't have a great relationship with the father, it tends to lead to, well, a lot of instability, a lot of, bad choices, etc., etc. The fact that she married very young as well, I think, was quite telling. Although, according to the articles that I have come across, her mother as well pressured her to get married to her first husband, who was Nicky Hilton, and he was, well, part of the Hilton family, and he was very wealthy, so it was orchestrated. Unfortunately, that husband was abusive towards her, and eventually she filed for divorce. But the second husband was not much better. The second husband was much older than she was. I think he was 20 years her senior. I think his name was Michael Wilding, a British actor. And as far as I have read, again, that husband was also quite abusive. I'm not sure if physically, but I think psychologically as well. And eventually the relationship fizzled out because she became a much more successful actor, even though they did have 2 kids together. But I'm going to get into that more in a bit. So this is what I can see with respect to her childhood. Now, when it comes to her physical appearance, it's really interesting. When it comes to her physical appearance, first of all, let me start with the theory. So I don't think I have talked about this really too much specifically about what placements should you look at, except for the ascendant, which I think I have mentioned before, and I think a lot of people who are into astrology know that the ascendant technically does influence the physical appearance. However, it is not the only thing to look at. Definitely not. So when it comes to physical appearance, you have to look at, yes, the ascendant sign. Also, to some extent, of course, the nakshatra that the ascendant is in, the ruler of the ascendant, the nakshatra, and the sign that the ruler of the ascendant is in. Also very important are aspects. Aspect to the ascendant will show the body. Also, the ascendant shows, or the Lagna in Vedic astrology, however you want to call it, it shows both the body and the face, technically, the full body. The second house sometimes will give hints to the person's face. The moon as well. The moon and the second house. So, when it comes to, first of all, her moon being in Vishaka, kind of explains that really kind of intense energy that I think she did give off to a large extent, despite her small stature. Remember that I also mentioned Vishaka being symbolized by the male tiger, so there's a certain amount of intensity associated with this nakshatra, and also above average attractiveness, a certain feline quality as well, which I definitely think she had, although not exactly a domesticated sort of feline energy. Yeah, so that's something that already kind of matches. Her face definitely was very striking. However, that, having moon in Vishaka is not enough to explain why she was good looking, aside from her genetic inheritance, of course, which also plays a part. But also what stands out to me is the fact that she has, let me see, she has Saturn aspecting moon in Vishaka. And again, I kind of wanted to do a separate video on this, but if you look at the actors in the past, I would say in the past century even, the ones who are the most popular, the most photogenic, especially in the pre-plastic surgery era, because nowadays I think a lot of people can manipulate their appearance. But in the past, especially with these, stars of old Hollywood, many of them had prominent Saturn on the appearance. I think Vivian Lee also had a strong Saturn. I'm not sure if she had Saturn in the first house or, again, aspecting or somehow influencing the moon, which is the face, the facial features. And I think this is pretty important because Saturn aspecting the moon gives a certain angularity to the face. It gives, usually gives a pretty prominent nose. But it also gives like a really good bone structure, the kind of bone structure that makes people look good on camera. Another great example that I did consider, I was going to make like a separate video, and I think I am going to make a separate video about aesthetics, and especially the current or modern beauty ideals and how they're how they are kind of illustrated by the age of Aquarius, the fact that Saturnians are basically the ideal nowadays when it comes to beauty. So I definitely think that Saturn aspecting her moon added to her having the high cheekbones, the strong features, that made her photogenic and telegenic, basically, which was incredibly important for an actress, especially, for one that became famous before plastic surgery was widely accessible. And aside from that, let me see. Right, so her ascendant being in Scorpio definitely already kind of explains this very strong contrasting appearance. The fact that she had those really strong eyebrows. I also read that she had some kind of genetic condition by which she was born with 2 sets of eyelashes, which made her eyes look like she was always wearing mascara. Her eyes were very outlined. I remember reading a story that when she was a child and she went for an audition, the director or the casting person basically yelled at her to wipe the makeup off, and they were shocked that actually those were her natural eyelashes. So I think the Scorpio explains her very kind of, I think, dark. Yes, I don't mean like her skin, but I mean her hair, her contrasting appearance, that contrast between the color of her eyes and her skin and her very black hair. I think that definitely added to her, attractiveness and her mystique as an actor. But aside from that, her ascendant is also in Jyeshta, which is a very intense nakshatra again. Jyeshta is really interesting, and not just a very intense, and usually Jyeshta I have seen on the ascendant again in the charts of some really good looking women, especially also men. But aside from that, aside from physical appearance, Jyeshta also, if you remember, I talked about this in the Mercury ruled nakshatras. It is the nakshatra that I have seen most prominent in people who are really self-made. People who basically make it through their own efforts, and they make it big. And in her case, well, she definitely seems to, fit the bill. Because even though, yes, she was pushed by her parents, she wasn't someone who was like highly connected or anything like that. So she really was successful through her own efforts. And another thing that I wanted to say with respect to her appearance is you also have to look at, let me see, the Navamsha. And in her Navamsha, that's something that I'm going to mention, I don't think I have mentioned before, that when it comes to physical appearance, you also have to look at the Navamsha, actually. The Navamsha is like almost hand in hand with the D1 chart. Although technically the Navamsha will become especially active after marriage, or if you don't get married after the age of 35 to 38, so like roughly midlife. That is the theory. I have actually seen that the Navamsha really is pretty strong in showing people's physical appearance throughout their lives. And also, if you look at her Navamsha, she also has ascendant in Capricorn, which further kind of emphasizes this Saturnian element. But on top of that, not only does she have ascendant in Capricorn, she also has Jupiter in the ascendant with Ketu, which is really interesting. Actually, no, scratch, without Ketu. Just Jupiter. Ketu is in Aquarius, so it's in the second house. Technically, the second house, which is the house of the face. But yes, so she has Jupiter in the ascendant, and she also has the ruler of the ascendant in Pisces. I think, to me, like, especially in the second half of life, she struggled with her weight. And Jupiter is the planet that, well, I have also mentioned this in the Jupiter rule and in multiple videos, that Jupiter is connected to growth. So when it comes to medical astrology, Jupiter can be connected to things like, unfortunately, cancer, like uncontrolled growths of cells. But it also is connected to growing in weight. It also is connected to growing in height, for instance, like people who have a pituitary gland problem or something, like they're growing to high. I'm pretty sure, I haven't done intense analysis, but I wouldn't be surprised if something is going on badly with their Jupiter energy. But especially in her case, because Jupiter is in Capricorn, it's not a very happy placement for Jupiter in the Navamsha. And so she has like a double Jupiterian energy here. Not only does she have Jupiter in the ascendant itself, but she also has the ruler of the ascendant, which is Saturn, in Pisces, which is another Jupiter-ruled sign. And in fact, as far as I have seen, Jupiter, or like, not Jupiter, sorry, but the ruler of the ascendant being connected to Pisces, especially in the Navamsha, I have seen this multiple times where the person struggles with weight gain. And I think it's particularly telling in her case because the weight problem started for her at a relatively later stage in her life. Even though technically her Navamsha was activated from the age of when she first got married, which I think that was around the age of 18. But she has had fluctuations in her weight, and that is shown in the Navamsha. However, ascendant being in Capricorn definitely emphasizes her good looks and further emphasizes this, like, how should I put it? Like I said, photogenic, telegenic sort of appearance that definitely kept her popular for a long time, basically for, I think, I don't know how many decades, but she was probably in her 60s when she stopped acting, or even her 70s. Another thing that I wanted to say, she also has the ruler of her ascendant in the Navamsha is not just in Pisces, but it's in Uttara Bhadrapada, which is again ruled by Saturn, and it's also ruled by connected to Lakshmi. I have also mentioned this in several videos. So there is an element of how should I put it, being connected to wealth here. Her chart already shows that she is going to be continuously going to be prosperous after midlife or after marriage, because the ruler of her ascendant in the Navamsha falls in Uttara Bhadrapada and in the third house from the ascendant, which gives her a very strong willpower, which I think definitely has stayed true about her throughout her life. Some other things that I can say when it comes to her D1 chart. When it comes to her D1 chart, right, so she has two ascendant rulers. One of them is Mars. Mars is falling in the fourth house. That means that, let me see, one Arudha Lagna is actually Aquarius. And she has Mars, Sun, and Mercury in Aquarius. So this is very fitting for... Great ambulance. This is very fitting for an actress. So having Sun in the Arudha Lagna basically means that she was perfect to be center stage, which has stayed true her entire life. Sorry. She has stayed true basically her entire life. From beginning to end, she was always in the limelight. And like I said, also, I'm going to be linking all the related videos in the description. I have talked about Arudha Lagna before. The Arudha Lagna is different from the Lagna or the ascendant. It's calculated based on the ruler of the ascendant. And it more specifically focuses on the energy that you give off. And when it comes to planets in the Arudha Lagna, these are going to show how what people see you to be most fitted doing, let's say. The roles that people see you in most naturally. So it's a perfect placement, really, for an actor. But not only that, having Mars in the Arudha Lagna as well also gave her that aura of feistiness. And also, I think she was quite militant. I think she was militant for the gay community. She was friends with a few famous gay men, I think including James Dean for a while. And so she was a militant person, but not only that, she really had that feisty kind of persona and was cast in roles as sometimes a leader. I mean, despite the fact that she had a really small stature, I think she was like 5'1", 5'2", something like that. So she was not some kind of a towering, impressive woman physically, but she had that kind of energy, that, you know, assertiveness, that drive that made her appropriate for roles like, I don't know, Cleopatra, or the role she played in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, the woman who was, you know, very loud and aggressive, and Taming of the Shrew, etc., etc., some of the famous roles that she was known for. Definitely Mars, and also Mercury as well. Mercury connected to the sun in the Arudha Lagna definitely shows that, you know, she was seen as a person who had a dramatic oratory ability. And also, now that I look at it, Mars is ruling her third house from the Arudha Lagna, which is also the house of communication. So clearly she looks like a person who would be successful in any kind of profession where communication is key, which again is very fitting for an actress. So this was one Arudha Lagna. However, as you may remember, Scorpio having two different rulers, which are Ketu and Mars, she must have two Arudha Lagnas. So then we have Ketu in Virgo. So that means her second Arudha Lagna is, let me see, Cancer, right. So the second, this is really interesting because I think it really matches the kind of public image that she had. So one Arudha Lagna being in Cancer with Jupiter there, also opposite Saturn, very interesting, I think definitely explains the fact that she was also seen as very feminine. I mean, Cancer and the moon are the most feminine energies. When you see people having like either Arudha Lagna in Cancer, or especially when they have the moon in the Arudha Lagna or in the 7th house from the Arudha Lagna, because those are the only placements from which the moon can aspect the Arudha Lagna, these people are going to be perceived as very moody and very feminine. But like, moody is probably a better word that can be applied to any gender. And I think this matches again the way her public image, that she was seen as someone who was, you know, kind of a little princess as well, and kind of capricious, and sometimes, you know, being a little bit spoiled. She had a reputation for, you know, wanting presents. I think when she was, I remember I saw some documentaries about her ages ago, that she expected to be given like jewelry or some kind of a present whenever she started filming or something like that. She was also very much known for her jewelry collection. So, I mean, I think it is fitting that she also has one Arudha Lagna in Cancer, as well with Jupiter, just showing that by and large, she also had this image of being quite benevolent. And also, again, Jupiter in Cancer in the Arudha Lagna also can explain how she was very known for her weight fluctuations as well. In Cancer, Jupiter in a water sign, especially in Cancer, again, can show a person whose weight fluctuates. And this is something that people know her for, okay? You might notice this, like, for people that, let's say, you could be having, like, weight fluctuations or some kind of big transformation in life, and people eventually don't give that much attention to this issue. I'm talking about celebrities, let's say. But with other celebrities, it's like all they talk about. You may notice this. And usually when you're looking at the charts of the celebrities whose weight problems are always being discussed, you probably can expect to see something like Cancer, Jupiter, you know, connected to the Arudha Lagna, because it shows that people will notice this first and foremost about them. Okay, this is something I wanted to say. With respect to... And also there's an added element in her chart, which is that she also has, no, actually, wait. I was going to say, no, yeah, also with having Saturn in the 7th from the Arudha Lagna, in her second Arudha Lagna, meaning Cancer, having Saturn there basically makes the weight problems become even more obvious, because Saturn tends to show a problem or a negative view of whatever is being visible. So Saturn being opposite Jupiter kind of lends to this becoming even more of an emphasized issue in her life or with respect to her image. Another thing that I see with respect to her appearance, what was I going to say? Right, aside from this, she has, let me see, Mars, Sun, Mercury. I think the Sun is, wait, 14 degrees. Yeah. Basically, she has Sun, Mercury, and Mars in Sastabisha Nakshatra. Which, I haven't really talked about this, but I was going to make a separate video, or I will talk about it when I get to the Rahu rule nakshatras, because Sastabisha is a Rahu rule nakshatra. And my theory about this is that basically wherever it shows up in a person's chart, it tends to show some suffering connected to that area of life. So having 3 planets in Sastabisha, again involving the Sun and Mars, and falling in the 4th house, just further kind of reinforces the fact that she really suffered when it came to her childhood. Her early life and her parents were really not great. That was definitely a source of suffering. But at the same time, Sastabisha is very connected to, you know, people who are very influential in the world. Because it is ruled by Rahu, there is this connection to the media, especially since Sastabisha falls in Aquarius as well, not just because it's ruled by Rahu, but it is one of those nakshatras that really shows up prominently in the charts of people who have had mass fame, you know, have influenced entire generations of people, you know. Yes, whether usually artists, but it doesn't always have to be artists. It's also nakshatra that is connected to healing and basically all kinds of brilliance, because again, it falls in Aquarius. So like the other nakshatras that have at least some part in Aquarius, they are kind of, I guess, avant-garde, and they are massively influential to large groups of people. So this again kind of really goes hand in hand with her entire life's path, that she was very well known and very influential. But about the issue of being influential, let me see. Right, also I can see that now that I look at it, she has Saturn in the 3rd house from both her ascendant in the D1 as well as in the D9. again, this really kind of, and as far as I have seen, wait, let me check again. She's a life path 8. Now, again, I'm getting into numerology here, but for those of you who know about numerology, life path 8 is one of those, in fact, it is the most difficult life path. It generally shows people that have to go through a lot of challenges, a lot of ups and downs. It's also connected to, well, the 8th house in astrology, which is the house of Scorpio, but the life path 8 shows a very Mars/Saturn kind of energy throughout the life. And this is pretty much also reflected in her horoscope, with having Saturn in the 3rd house from both the Lagna in the D1 and the Lagna in the D9, which shows a person with a lot of willpower, but also a person who's going to have to deal with a lot of struggles, basically. And let me see. What I wanted to say, having ascendant ruler in Sastabisha, and the second is also having ascendant ruler in Sastabisha can also massively explain her popularity, her influence, the fact that she was so famous for such a long amount of time. But with respect to fame, let me see another thing. Right, with respect to fame in today's world, but this is an entirely kind of philosophical debate. But people who get mass fame, especially when it comes to show business, connections between Saturn and the moon are very important. Exactly why, that's an entire philosophical debate, okay? But I would argue that it's, again, mainly because we are in the age of Aquarius, and Saturn is the planet that is connected to things like socialism. It's basically the planet that, first of all, co-rules Aquarius, and we are in the age of Aquarius. Saturn and Rahu, this is why Saturn and Rahu, in my humble opinion, are most connected to fame nowadays. This is not something that I've read anywhere, but because the collective subconscious is very much influenced by Aquarius, these are the kinds of people that basically show others what they want to see. And Saturn connected to the moon it's one of those aspects that does add to people's popularity. And, also attractiveness, because the moon is the face and Saturn gives that angularity and a face that is photogenic, like I said. So I think this adds to it, but she also has Venus conjunct Rahu in the 5th house, which again is one of those placements that shows massive amounts of fame. Yes, I haven't actually looked at things like her Ashtak Varga scores, because I'm pretty sure that these things are further emphasized in the Ashtak Varga scores, which are some scores that show how influential each house is. Okay. Another thing that I wanted to say with respect to her Navamsha. Let me see. Her her 10th house. Her 10th house in the Navamsha is in Libra. 12, 11, yes. And Venus is again, I think, let me check, where is it? Well, no, it's actually in her Navamsha, Venus is conjunct Ketu. It's opposite Rahu, which is really kind of interesting. But, well, at least there is a contact to Rahu, so that would explain also some degree of fame. But Venus is, aside from being conjunct Ketu, it's also conjunct, again, the Sun and Mercury. So, which, again, the Sun being the planet that is most associated with dramatic arts, being the ruler of Leo. And also in her D1 chart, her 10th house is in Leo. And the Sun is the ruler, conjunct Mercury. Let me see, conjunct Mercury, conjunct her 1st house ruler, right? Conjunct Mars, which is the first house ruler. And then it's also conjunct the 6th house, which is in Aries, if you're looking at her D1 chart. So the 10th house ruler is connected to the 1st house, the 6th house, the 8th house, and the 11th house, which really explains her career trajectory, in the sense that the 1st house connection shows that her physical appearance, her body, literally, was very instrumental in her career. The 8th house shows that her sexuality has been widely discussed and has been definitely a part of her career development. I mean, I think this is true for many actors, and I've actually seen this. I'm pretty sure that I also saw this connection to the 8th house in Rudolph Valentino's chart, which is the only other famous person astrological profile I have done except for Elizabeth Taylor. I'm also going to be linking that video in the description if you're curious about it. But yes, I usually have seen this in the charts of many actors, especially the ones who are known as quote-unquote sexy, that there is some kind of contact between the 10th house and the 8th house, because it kind of brings that, you know, mystique around their public persona, and also, you know, makes people wonder what is happening in their secret lives, I think. So that's the connection to the 8th house. The 6th house is very important. It may not be obvious, but as far as I have read, Elizabeth Taylor was extremely competitive from a young age. Well, probably also because her mother has pushed her from behind. But the 6th house, generally when the 6th house is connected to the 10th house, the house of career, you tend to see these situations where people are just known to be very competitive, right? They're in very harsh, cutthroat sort of fields where it's very much a dog-eat-dog kind of world. And if I remember correctly, also when it comes to Elizabeth Taylor, there was a lot of competition surrounding her persona. She was rumored to be a rival to Marilyn Monroe. They were contemporaries. Then there was some business about her being declared dead at some point, and there was this like entire press thing. I remember seeing this in the documentary about her, that this other actress, I think Joan Collins, her name was, that you know, she was told that she was going to play Cleopatra because Elizabeth Taylor had died. They even had obituaries for her in the paper, and it turned out that actually she hadn't died. So, but there were all these like things when it came to her image, like she was pitted against other actresses, you know. I think she was portrayed as being a very competitive person as well. Probably also because of Mars in the Arudha Lagna landed, you know, to her being seen as this very tough, competitive person. But you can definitely see it here with a connection between the 6th house and the 10th house, that her fame, her status is connected to being able to defeat competitors. That's basically what the 6th house connection to 10th shows. So we have the 6th. Also, the 11th is the house of masses, right? Of mass fame as well. So it's connected to, you know, the career. The career basically shows that this is a person who is going to be known to wide groups of people, you know. Very fitting, basically. Okay, so this is what I have seen, well, at least from the D1 chart. But also, like I said, in the D9 chart, when it comes to her career, there is a repetition of acting. You know, there's a connection to the sun, there's a connection to Mercury, which is really, really very interesting. And in fact, let me see if I am looking at the right, yeah, I'm looking at the right place. Her sun is basically Vargotama, which makes it even more powerful when it comes to, wait, the sun and Mercury. The sun and Mercury are Vargotama, both of them in Aquarius, in the D1 and in the D9 chart, which makes them particularly instrumental in carving her entire life's path. So basically, in other words, she was born to be on the stage, figuratively and literally. So this is what I can see with respect to her career. Let me see actually some more stuff. Also, when it comes to her D10 chart, she also has Lagna in Capricorn. Lagna in Capricorn and Jupiter in the 10th house. Basically, Jupiter in the 10th house, Mars in the 4th house. These are placements of really high status when it comes to career. Especially Jupiter in the 10th house. But yeah, this is pretty much what I can, well, without getting too much into detail. If you get into detail when it comes to the D10, I could be here all night. But the main thing that I can say is that Jupiter in the 10th of the D10, definitely high status. High status, also Venus aspecting as well, the ascendant of the D10 being in Cancer, also emphasizes the fact that her femininity, right, is really important in her career. And the ruler of her D10, most importantly, is Saturn, and it falls in the 11th house, the house of gain. Again, a very powerful placement for a high-profile career. And pretty much what I don't want to get too much into detail, because again, if I were to get into detail about career, it would never end. And let me see, though, something that I wanted to see. So her ascendant in the D9. No, scratch that. I wanted to say something, but I checked and it wasn't the way that I thought. Okay, so this is what I can say about her career by and large, without getting too much into detail. So I'm not going to look at Karakamsha, stuff like that. One thing that, when it comes to her Atmakarka also is Venus. So clearly her path in life is about the arts. And also beauty and sensuality and luxury. She was very, like I said, she was really known not just for being a high profile, successful actress, but she was also known for her very lavish, extravagant lifestyle, which is very accurate now, not just looking at her Atmakarka being Venus, but also her Atmakarka being conjunct Rahu. And also, if you notice, they are basically exalted. So Venus is exalted in Pisces, which probably explains why she has gotten such great results from this Venus-Rahu conjunction in the 5th house of her D1 chart. Because plenty of people can have, these fame-inducing or fame-favorable placements, but they do not reach the level of celebrity that Elizabeth Taylor had. But in her case, there are multiple placements that kind of suggest this, that basically suggest the fact that she was born, to be very, very successful and very prominent, very visible to a lot of people. And now that I look at something that is really quite interesting that stood out to me, when it comes to her luxurious, extravagant lifestyle, she has Ketu in the 2nd house of her Navamsha. This is a placement that actually makes a person very anxious about their finances. So I don't know, like maybe, of course, this is getting into her psychology. Nobody really knows what she was like inside, but it could explain why she was so focused on materialism, or why she was collecting jewelry and stuff. Like maybe to some extent she kind of had anxiety that, you know, it was all gonna go away, or like she had to hoard as much possessions, as much stuff as possible in order to feel secure. Could explain it. Also, in the second house of the Navamsha, something that I probably should have mentioned is having Venus and Sun and Mercury there really shows that, well, she was basically good looking throughout her entire life. Venus in the second house shows, you know, the beauty of the face. And I definitely think that, well, also the fact that she had Moon in Bharani, another famous actress I think that had Moon in Bharani. Wait, let me check. I'm pretty sure it's Bharani. Yep, it's Bharani. So Moon in Bharani in the Navamsha makes a person very, very feminine, very artistic, very focused on luxury. Also, the other actress that she was actually compared to a lot, and who also had Moon in Bharani, as far as I remember, in the D9 chart, was Vivian Leigh. And they were really very much compared to one another because they were both, I mean, born in Britain at least, and they had very similar, I mean, not very similar, but they had a kind of similar look. And also Vivian Leigh also had like a strong Saturn influence, I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly. I think she had like Moon aspecting, Saturn aspecting the Moon, or Moon conjunct Saturn, something like that, if I remember correctly. Or Saturn aspecting the ascendant. In any case, if you're interested in me doing Vivian Leigh's profile, I'm also going to consider doing that at some point in the future. But yes, Moon in Bharani, and I also mentioned this, and I probably should mention it again, in my humble opinion, I think, especially for women, Moon's nakshatra in the Navamsha is actually even more influential than the Moon in the D1 chart. And especially as time goes by, as you know, people get older, they start to become more and more of the Moon nakshatra. It's not even so much that they become more and more. It's more like the Navamsha kind of surfaces more and more. That's how I would put it. But again, maybe I will get more into detail about this at some point in the future. But yes, in her case, also Moon in Bharani makes a person very sensuous, very, very feminine. It's the most feminine nakshatra, I would say. Not just I would say, other people have said as well, that it's, you know, very much connected to, you know, femininity, art, creativity, you know, luxury, anything to do, because Bharani, and it's also a very, ironically, a very feisty energy. And I say ironically only if you look at gender from, you know, the Abrahamic religion's point of view, which has influenced most of humanity for a long time now, that, you know, women who are feminine are very meek and submissive. Bharani is actually very, very feisty, but it's also very feminine. It's kind of like, you know, the untamed sort of feminine sort of energy. Similarly to Ardra. Ardra being another manifestation of kind of untamed femininity, if you ask me, but I digress. So yes, this is something that I have noticed, and no doubt Moon in Bharani gave her that extra energy, determination. Since it falls in Aries, it's a combination of the energy of Mars and Venus, because Bharani is ruled by Venus, but it falls in Aries, so that's where the dichotomy comes from with this nakshatra, that it's very feminine, but it's also very kind of headstrong and very feisty, very determined to succeed. It actually shows up quite prominently in a lot of artists' charts as well. So, I mean, really, looking at her chart overall, it's not a surprise that she was as famous as she was. Like I said, really, according to her horoscope, she was basically born to be famous. Yes, so this is what I can say pretty much by and large. I mean, maybe at some point I will notice something new and I will mention it. But this is what I can notice with respect to since wait. Since I'm at the topic of, I think I started with the Atmakaraka. And the Karakamsha, the Swa, actually, let me start like that. The Swa is the sign that the Atmakaraka falls in the D9 chart. So in her case, the Swa falls in Aquarius, if I am looking at the right chart. Yes. So the Swa falls in Aquarius, which puts her 5th house from the Swa in Gemini. Again, which shows that the talents she brought from a past life were her communication skills. Not just her communication skills, but her dramatic expression. Her skill for dramatic expression. Why? Because she has not only is the 5th house from the Swa in Gemini, but she also has Mercury in the Swa. So Mercury and Sun and Venus and Ketu also in the Swa. So definitely this is a person who was very, very creative for many lifetimes, and most likely had something to do with the dramatic arts in previous lifetimes. So this is definitely the talents that she brought forth that were useful to her in, well, now former life, because sadly she passed away. But these were the talents that she brought with her that helped her throughout her entire life, basically. So this is from the D9. And again, not only from the D9, but also if you look at the Karakamsha, which is the chart with the Swa as the ascendant in the D1 chart, you also see Gemini as the 5th house, which I have mentioned. The 5th from the Swa shows talents that you bring from previous lives. Again, I have mentioned this in a video where I talked about Karakamsha and the talents you bring from a previous life. And again, in the D1, in the D9, you have the repeated theme of Sun and Mercury being there. So clearly, you know, very, very talented person when it comes to the art of expression. Dramatic expression. Sun being conjunct Mercury shows that this is a person who has a very commanding way of expressing herself. And in this case, in the D1 chart, she also has Mars conjunct the Sun and Mercury. So very aggressive, powerful way of expressing herself, but also creative. Pretty much. Okay. So this is what I can say, okay, about her career. Now, when it comes to her love life, I have also touched upon her love life, I think, in several videos. But the first thing that I'm going to say is also that I mentioned this in another video. The ruler, so looking at her D1 chart, okay, the ruler of her 7th house is Venus. And Venus is conjunct Rahu in the 5th house. And her Darakaraka is Saturn. Her Darakaraka shows the archetype of the partner that she is attracted to, that she will attract, that she will ultimately marry. In her life, she has married, as far as I know, 2 men. Actually, she married 6 men. Wait, let me clarify this. She married, I think, 6 men. Richard Burton, she married twice, so she was married 7 times. Was about to get married, I think, an 8th time. But she has married at least 2 men that I can recall who were foreigners. Richard Burton was from the UK, and her second husband as well, Michael Wilding or something like that, was also a foreigner, technically. Now, you might think, but, well, they were born in the same country. Well, actually, in her case, it's interesting because no matter how you look at it, yes, she was born in the UK, but she lived almost her entire life in the US. So no matter how you look at it, she married at least some husbands that were of a foreign origin. And foreign origin does not necessarily mean, of course, it can also mean a person of a different race or a different religion. I think in her case, I'm pretty sure that she has also married outside of her, well, I don't know if she had a religion, but she married people that were pretty different. It doesn't have to be like extreme differences, but in any case, this is shown by Rahu being conjunct Venus because, well, Venus is the lord of the 7th house and Rahu is the primary influence that shows a foreign spouse. And then Saturn being the Dara Karaka, and in her case, Saturn is opposite Jupiter, which is also the planet of the husband. And if you can also see this, Jupiter is actually exalted in the D1 chart. So this shows that her husband's, plural, or rather I would say most of the men that she has been or I don't know if there were other men that she was romantically involved with, but let's say her husband archetype being exalted, even though it is also opposite Saturn, which is not a happy situation for Jupiter, basically shows that the men she has come across in her life definitely have served her life's path, you know, have supported her in her life, her career. They definitely didn't hinder her, let me put it like that, okay? So, I don't know, if she had married a husband who tried to keep her completely locked up at home and in the kitchen, then you would have seen a very, very badly placed Jupiter in the D1 chart. But Jupiter is pretty healthy in the D1, at least. However, also what I wanted to say is that Jupiter being in mutual aspect to Saturn shows that she is also going to have husbands that are either considerably older or considerably younger than she was, which has also proven to be true for her. She did, her second husband was 20 years older. I think most of her partners were older, but I'm pretty sure that by the end of her life, she has also had partners who were younger. So yes, this is something to be noticed. Another thing is, let me see, Venus in Pisces. Also, let me see. Since the Lord of the 7th house is exalted, this would also explain her, you know, gaining from marriage, at least to some extent. And her Venus really exalted, falling in Revati. Also, wow, like I was thinking about this, like Revati can actually show connection to, or can show a spouse that really enjoys flying. So I don't know if her husband really enjoyed flying, but I know that one of her husbands, I think the third husband, passed away while flying, I think in a helicopter accident, or a plane went down or something like that. A private plane or helicopter. So maybe there was a connection there between her partner liking to fly or just liking to travel a lot. That could have been shown by her 7th house lord being in Revati. Another thing, let me see, the 7th. Wow, this is, now that I noticed this is not a very pleasant thing to say, but here it is. Also in the Navamsha, the Lord of the 7th house, which is in Cancer, it's ruled by the moon, and the moon falls in Bharani. Now, the problem is not that it falls in the 4th house, the fact that the moon falls in the 4th house, but the problem is that it falls in Bharani. Actually, I have read this in several sources. I haven't actually seen a lot of people, so I'm very curious. Again, maybe comment in the comment section. Maybe you know someone, or maybe you yourself are a case like this. But I have read that when the 7th lord is, or especially in the Navamsha, if the 7th lord of the Navamsha is in Bharani, that marriages will suddenly end. So it can be divorce, it can be bereavement. So that could explain, at least partially, why her relationships didn't last. Although, if I remember correctly, in her Upapada Lagna, again, there were probably at least some signifiers as well. Because usually when you see a repeated theme in someone's life, like in her case, the fact that she had multiple marriages, it's usually something that is shown in multiple places in the horoscope. But this one stood out to me right now, the fact that she had moon in Bharani, which also happened to be the Lord of the 7th house in the Navamsha. So that probably also added to the sudden endings of her relationships, or maybe her inability to have like a really long-lasting marriage. Okay, so this is something that I noticed with respect to the partner. What I also wanted to look at is, let me see, the Dara Karaka being Saturn. It fell into Shravana, which is, wait, no, not a Shravana, Uttarashadha, yeah. That makes a little bit more sense, in the sense that, well, Uttarashadha again is ruled by the sun. So you would, again, maybe this also added to her inability to hold down a spouse, but again, don't jump to, I don't know, depressed conclusions or anything like, oh my god, I have my partner archetype in Uttarashadha. But usually Uttarashadha, I have also mentioned this when I did the sun rule nakshatras. This is a nakshatra that almost always spells some kind of trouble connected to maintaining a marriage or a long-term relationship. In fact, all of the sun nakshatras and the sun itself is really an energy that does not lend itself to happy partnerships, because it is a very independent, self-sufficient kind of energy. So now that I'm saying this, her sun being very strong in her horoscope, you know, Vargotama, and connected to the Karakamsha in both the D1 and the D9, to the Swa in the D9. So I think the sun was very prominent, and also the fact that she was, you know, center stage, connected to the 10th house as well, kind of, you know, probably also explained this path of her life to be dissatisfied in relationships. And the Dara Karaka falling in Uttarashadha would further reinforce this, because this is a person who maybe to some extent was meant to take a more solitary path. Okay, it doesn't mean that Uttarashadha itself does not like, I don't know, ends relationships or anything like that, but it is more likely for these natives to feel easily dissatisfied, because this is a nakshatra that is very spiritual in nature, and well, they also need a lot of alone time. Usually usually as time progresses, as they get older, they feel more and more of a calling to be spiritual and to be basically, you know, to withdraw within themselves, really, to restrain their energy. So it could also at least partially explain, together with all the other factors in her horoscope, why she was, you know, having a hard time maintaining relationships. But of course, it could be equally explained by the fact that, you know, she didn't have a great childhood, at least to some extent. So, again, this is something that I wanted to say, but another thing is, in the Navamsha, she has, let me see, Venus, not Venus, Saturn. So Saturn is her Saturn is her Dara Karaka. No, Venus, that's the one that I was going to look at. So Venus being her Atma Karaka. In the 7th house from Venus, in the D9 chart, we also see Rahu. Rahu falls in Leo, and Venus is in Aquarius in her D9 chart. And again, I have mentioned this, I think in the video that I did on what was it called? Something about big age gaps in relationships, unconventional relationships or unorthodox relationships. Again, I'm going to link that video in the description. I also mentioned there that you also want to look at the 7th placement from the Atma Karaka in the D9 and the D1. I'm going to look at the D1 in a bit as well. Well, in the D1, she doesn't have any planets opposite Venus. But in the D9 chart, also to some extent in the D7, you want to look for the 7th house from the Atma Karaka to see what kind of partners you are attracted to, but not necessarily the kind of partners that you're going to end up with in a long-term partnership or marriage. That's more seen from the D9 chart. So in her case, Rahu being there further emphasizes the tendency to have husbands who are have some kind of a shock factor, let me put it like that. So either they are significantly older, significantly younger, from a different culture, from a different background. Basically, any kind of spouse that is seemingly a surprising choice for her would be explained by Rahu. And it's further reinforced actually by the ruler of her 7th house, namely Venus, being conjunct Rahu in the D1 chart. So yeah, again, can explain why further emphasize actually why throughout her life she was known for having unconventional relationships. I also mentioned her as an example in that video, I'm pretty sure, now that I think about it, that she had Venus conjunct Rahu, which can also show, by the way, Rahu in the 7th placement. Sorry that I'm jumping around, but ideas keep popping up. But Rahu in the 7th placement from the Atmakarka, I have seen this repeatedly, or repeated Rahu themes, because someone asked me about this at some point. It does show people who tend to marry famous people. Although in her case, really, I mean, being a celebrity, it was probably kind of the sensible thing to marry another famous person, I think. But even I have seen this in the charts of people that, you know, are regular, non-famous individuals, where they have this Rahu in the 7th placement from their Atmakarka, usually in the D9 chart. They tend to attract famous individuals, or people who are like not necessarily mass famous, but you know, people who have a certain popularity. Like maybe they have a popular YouTube channel, or I don't know, maybe they're very appreciated in their field. I've actually had this placement once with a woman who said that she kept attracting like famous people, I think singers or athletes or something like that. She had a similar placement with Rahu influencing her spouse archetype, influencing her spouse archetype. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Another thing that I want to look at though, let me see. The 7th ruler of Venus in the Navamsha falls in the 2nd house in the Navamsha. I mean, the 7th house ruler from the D1. And the Darakarka, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Again, I don't want to depress anyone with this, but this is another theory that I have read, and I have not tested it much personally, but in her case, it checks out. So technically, if you check the relationship between the Darakarka and the ruler of the 7th house in the Navamsha, if you see a like 12th house, 12, you know, house, 8th house placements, difference between them. So if in her case, let's see, Saturn is Darakarka and Venus is the ruler of the 7th house of the D1 chart. And if you look at her D9 chart, they are placed 12 placements from themselves, from each other. So Venus is 12 placements from Saturn. Saturn is 2nd house from Venus. So this is one of the not so fortunate combinations. It tends to show potential losses through marriage. Or of course, it can also add to the loss of marriage factor. Another bad combination can be 8 placements or 6 placements. These are probably the more troubled ones, okay, where relationships can be more challenging. Similarly to the Upapada Lagna. You know, I also mentioned in that video that if you have the ruler of the Upapada Lagna in the 12th house from the Upapada Lagna, or in the 8th house or in the 6th house, to a much lesser extent also in the 3rd house, it could be that the relationship will have struggles, or the person will struggle to maintain relationships. You know, there will be various difficulties connected to that depending on the house that is most represented, most influential. But with the 12th house, like it is in her case, similarly here in the Navamsha, it most likely shows loss of relationships, okay? So this could further, you know, emphasize the situation that, you know, she had a lot of loss of marriages. And I also, again, to depress you further, since I have gone down this path, sorry, but I have to speak as I find it. I also have mentioned this, again, I think in the Upapada Lagna video, that she has Ketu in the 3rd house from Jupiter. And I have read this and I have seen this, really. I have seen this. I'm sorry to say this now. Again, don't run into a panic and like, oh my God, it's the end of the world or something. I mean, I have already mentioned it in that video, so I think it's like the damage has been done if it already has depressed people. But yeah, she has Ketu in the 3rd house from Jupiter, and the theory is that that's what I was going to say, is that if you have a malefic planet in the 3rd house from Jupiter, if you're a woman, because Jupiter is the husband archetype, it will show that the husband will die, or one of the husbands will die. I have heard some theories that say it's the first husband that's gonna die, but I have not found that to be true. I would say it's actually something that deals more with how the dashas and antardashas are being activated. I don't think the number of the husband has anything to do with it. I have seen this, honestly, I have seen this with people. Actually, I have an acquaintance who has Ketu in the 3rd house from Jupiter, also lost her husband. And I've also seen this, I don't remember right now, but I remember checking this in the horoscope of a man, a famous man. I don't remember who it was, honestly. But I remember checking his chart and he had Mars in the 3rd house from Venus. So for men, you have to check Venus because Venus is the wife archetype. Do not marry a man. Do not marry a man if he has malefics in the 3rd from Venus, because yeah, you know, you don't want to be that sister. I mean, I don't know. I'm kidding, of course. If it is your karma, it's your karma. So I don't know. But yeah, I have checked this in a man's chart, and he had Mars, and his wife, I think, was murdered, or either was murdered or died in a car crash. And I remember thinking that was so fitting, you know, like, because Mars also is a malefic planet that I talked about this in Causes of Death. I'm not going to get into that here because it's gotten really dark already. But I have talked about this, that Mars tends to show a violent death, or like basically a violent death. Something piercing the body, or a car crash, or something mechanical, basically. And I remember in this, I don't remember who it is, but if I ever come across his chart again, I'm gonna maybe do a separate video connected to the Arudha, not to the Arudha, actually, to the spouse and deaths and stuff, bereavement. And she also had this, that's where I was getting to finally. So her 3rd husband died, and I'm pretty sure that I mentioned this in the Upapada Lagna video, or another video where I mentioned her, that at the time when her husband died, she had an antardasha, a dasha and an antardasha that were basically activating these planets. So either she was like in the dasha of Jupiter and the antardasha of Ketu, or the other way around, something like that. But there was like either some Ketu or Jupiter going on when her husband died. Her 3rd husband died like this, you know. Her 3rd husband died. I mean, he was the only husband that she had that actually died. And yes, so this is something that shows up. She has Ketu in the 3rd from Jupiter, and this is with respect to the D1 chart. So this particular issue of the malefic in the 3rd house from Jupiter for women, Venus for men. Again, if you are LGBT, you have to look at which energy you identify with the most, but in order to feel safe, you should look at both of them, I would say. Because even for women, Venus technically can show the spouse archetype. Because Venus is basically the Karaka of marriage. Venus is also like the natural Karaka of the Navamsha, so which is the chart of marriage. So to some extent, Venus also shows the spouse archetype for women as well, but mostly for women it's Jupiter, because yeah, Jupiter is the husband archetype. So another thing that I wanted to say, since we are talking about her relationship, her love life, what I have noticed is Jupiter is great in her D1 chart, but Jupiter in her Navamsha is not great. So she has Jupiter in Capricorn, which is one of the not so great positions for Jupiter to be in. It's quite, when it comes to, again, I'm going to link this video in the description. Sorry, I'm probably going to link half my channel in the description. But I have had a video where I talked about Jupiter as the spouse in the woman's chart, and whether the husband archetype of a woman shows that the husband's going to support her, and how much, in which area. And I mentioned there that if you have a bad Jupiter in the Navamsha, it shows that you're not going to come, the tendency, I stress this, it's not set in stone, but this is the natural tendency, unless you work on it, which most likely she didn't, right? Because why would she? She was rich and famous and probably thought that she was perfect. Probably not to be disrespectful. But I'm just saying, probably she didn't analyze herself very much. She probably did not go to an astrologer, because an astrologer would have told her this, that having a bad Jupiter in the D9 chart shows that you're going to attract husbands that are not really going to support your spiritual development or your higher development. And the way to counteract this, the remedy, so to speak, is basically you need to be cultivating Jupiterian qualities within your own life. So, cultivate a relationship to divinity, cultivate higher education, a sense of faith in the universe, in whatever, any kind of divinity that you want to believe in. It can be Gaia, it can be, Jesus. But basically, cultivating these Jupiterian qualities will help you attract a man who is good for you as a woman. And her case can also further explain the dissatisfaction in marriage, because she was marrying men who maybe seemed like they were supportive on a very basic level, because Jupiter in the D1 chart is in Cancer. So the D1 chart shows the general path in life, but basically on a more physical plane, so to speak, on a more physical, material plane. Okay, so the husband was not in the way of her career, maybe also helped a little bit with the kids, but it was, on basically a surface level. In the D9, though, you see a bad Jupiter, which shows that on a spiritual level, on an emotional level, she was not really happy in her marriages with these husbands that she has had. And furthermore, if you look at her D7 chart, I may also post this, Jupiter is in Gemini, which again is a really bad placement for Jupiter. When I say bad placement, I'm referring to this topic of how it affects the husband archetype. I'm not talking about debilitation and exaltation in general. But yes, Jupiter in Gemini is one of the worst placements. Again, it shows a partner that is quite scattered, that is, again, that's another thing. With Gemini, it can show a partner who is scattered in the sense that he shows his affections to other women, which, as far as I have read, has been true for her relationships, at least with Richard Burton. But yes, so this is some other sad things that kind of explain why she was dissatisfied in her relationships and eventually her marriages ended. Jupiter being in Gemini, and especially in the D7, I also mentioned in that video, in the D7 it shows basically what does the spouse bring you that you cannot already get yourself. So in fact, when it comes to happiness in relationship, I would say especially for a woman, Jupiter has to be good in the D7 in order for marriage to feel satisfying on any level. And unfortunately, she didn't have a great Jupiter. Being in Gemini, that was not a great position, and it's equally bad in the Navamsha, being in Capricorn. So this would further kind of explain why she was not happy in her marriages. This is what I wanted to say. And yeah, this is pretty much what I can say. Wow, this has been a really long recording. So yeah, this is pretty much what I can say. I cannot think of anything else to add. I mean, once again, this has been a really brief analysis. If I were to get really in depth, normally when I do, for instance, just to advertise a little bit, when I do a career reading, I look at the D10 chart way more in depth, and I look at the D1 chart and all the career dispositors in the D1 and to some extent also in the D9. But of course, if I were to go like really in depth on every aspect here, it would take forever. This is already a really long video. But I think overall I have covered some of the more really interesting parts of her trajectory, her energy. Yeah. So this has been pretty much it. And of course, once again, I will please ask you to subscribe. I really stress this because recently I have checked my analytics, and apparently only about 25 to 35% of the people who watch my channel, like on any given month, are actually subscribed to my channel. So yes, please subscribe. If you have enjoyed any video on my channel, if you have found value in my content, please subscribe because it is free and it's the easiest way to support my channel. Thank you. Okay, so, and also, of course, if you're interested in, being kept up to date with when I post a new video, please also hit the notifications bell. And please also check out my tarot channel if you're interested in that. And also comment in the comment section with anything you would like to add or ask or anything with respect to this topic or others. But please try to keep it mostly related to this topic. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics, and I also do some tarot readings. You can email me at the email in the video description, and I will send you more details. Thank you.